This is a discussion of gender and ethnicity in higher education, the first part, based primarily on the Access and Diversity Toolkit produced by the College Board. There are a couple of very important quotes from the landmark Supreme Court decision, Grutter v. Bollinger, that are worth considering in this context. Firstly, that effective participation by members of all racial and ethnic groups in the civic life of our nation is essential if the dream of one nation, indivisible, is to be realized. We talk about the civic responsibility of higher education, the responsibility to prepare citizens, which means a lot to me personally. I think it's extremely critical. And then whether that is a responsibility that applies only just to certain groups, and certainly the answer is no. And so in our effort to maximize the preparation of our citizens, it's important that we look at diverse and broad groups. And let's listen to Justice O'Connor herself tell us from her opinion to share this quote.
The educational benefits that flow from student body diversity are substantiated by numerous expert studies and reports showing that such diversity promotes learning and better prepares students for an increasingly heterogeneous workforce, for responsible citizenship, and for the legal profession.
She's referencing the legal profession because this was a case about law school admission. But again, responsible citizenship. Responsible citizenship requires diversity in the educational experience. And she upheld that in her opinion in this case. And we find that to be true instinctively in our daily work. I thought this article was very interesting in pointing out the differences between access and diversity. Even in the TBR world, I think those terms get lumped together a lot, from grant programs to offices on campus. So it was interesting to see the distinction made here between the idea of access being programs designed to correct for historical inequities. And I thought it was very important to understand here even recent historical inequities. We've struggled with that mightily within the TBR system, and some would say still are struggling with it, although I think we're making progress. And then the concept of diversity, which really is a means to an educational end. It's the idea that you cannot have a rich and full and adequate education without a diverse education. Again, that you must have a diverse learning environment to have the best possible educational outcome. And so access is about correcting mistakes of the past, and diversity is about making sure that educational outcomes are maximized for everyone. The article was clear about a couple of lightning rod terms. I thought that was a great way to put it. The idea of affirmative action being a lightning rod term, and I thought, I believe every publication of the college, we have to put at the bottom a statement that talks about our affirmative action officer. And so I went and looked, and on TBR's website, the Title VI officers list, which has the key contact for every single campus. Interesting to see that 9 of 19 institutions, including Chattanooga State, are still using the term in some form of affirmative action officer, even though that is certainly a lightning rod term. And then quotas. Quotas are another lightning rod term, and usually when quotas are brought up, they're brought up in a way that can stir up controversy. But it is important to note that even with the expansion of the ability of educational institutions to consider diversity factors in making admissions and financial aid decisions, still not legally acceptable to have a numeric quota as your method for achieving the educational benefits of diversity, even though the court has found that the educational benefits of diversity are very valid priority for educational institutions. And so this is where I begin to struggle maybe a little bit and thinking about, okay, we've just said you cannot have numeric quotas, but we are very interested in achieving this concept of the critical mass. The critical mass being the point at which, and I'll just quote from the article here, as the group's presence, the group being a group that has been historically discriminated against, as the group's presence and level of participation grows at a particular point, the perspective of members of the minority group and the character of relations between minority and non-minority changes qualitatively. This discrete point is known as the critical mass. So, in other words, you have to have, for any underrepresented group, you have to have on your campus a number of members of that group so that you do not have one or two or just a few members of that group. You have enough that the members of that group can feel comfortable, can see others to identify with in their classes and on campus. And at that point, wherever that point is, and again, part of the reason that I struggle, we can't give that critical mass a numeric value. Because if we did, we would perhaps be establishing a quota. And so then elsewhere in the article, it talks about goals. What are your institutional goals for diversity? And again, a point of struggle. Okay, great. Yes, we absolutely need institutional goals for diversity. But if we quantify those goals, as we ought to quantify goals. Most all goals that we've achieved because we've quantified and worked toward and measured and collected data. And where is the line between quantifying a diversity goal and establishing a quota? And I think that's something to wrestle with when considering diversity in higher education. And then the article was obviously very geared to the university setting, which is okay. Most literature about higher education is very much geared to the university setting. But we don't have quite the same levers in community college to build a diverse class. As an open access institution, we admit everybody who wants in. And that may or may not be a diverse group, and I think it has much to do with the community in which we are established. And so I think, and personally as someone who supervises recruiting, I spend some time thinking about whether our student body reflects the demographic makeup of our service area. And I think that's a goal worth striving for. But in a community college where we don't have the ability to say, you're in, you're not, in order to create the diverse class, we do still, though, have the ability to do some strong recruiting. And recruiting is an area where we can be a little discretionary, spend our time perhaps in high schools that attract and are composed of students from groups that we're trying to expand and intensify on our campus. And I think part of being successful in that area is to create some critical mass awareness to allow students from underrepresented groups, as we recruit them, to understand that we are a campus full of people from that group, whatever that group may be, that students can see themselves and others like them succeeding on our campus. And that's a true story. We just need to do a better job of telling it. And then to think about specific financial aid opportunities which do exist for students from various diverse backgrounds, to highlight that more and to tie that in to our recruiting effort. And this article was very interesting in pointing out that there's really no need at all for a wall of separation between recruiting and financial aid when it comes to these areas, and that is definitely a goal worth implementing in our own recruiting efforts.